Tony Hines here, and you're listening to Right to the Point. This is the podcast where we get right to the point.
Right to the point.
Well, in today's episode, I want to talk about time and how important time can be. And when I talk about time, I'm going to give an example. I'm going to start with a story about time, and it will demonstrate, I think, our different perceptions or conceptions of time, whether we come from east, west, north or south. And my first experience of different time horizons came up very sharp on a trip I made many years ago to Sri Lanka. And I was flying out to talk to various people in Sri Lanka about marketing for the clothing industry. The clothing industry in Sri Lanka contributes a large proportion of the gross domestic product. And so it's a very important industry for people in the country. While I was on the plane, I was preparing some notes for the discussions I was about to have in the coming week. And I arrived early morning, a little bit tired from the flight. There was a car to meet me, and off I went, taken to my hotel. And this was early in the morning. I think it was probably about 5-6 o'clock in the morning. Checked into the room, and I was told that somebody would be back to collect me at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock for breakfast and a meeting. And that happened. They came along, we had breakfast, we had a discussion, and they talked through some ideas, and they said, well, tomorrow in Colombo, which is the capital in Sri Lanka, you'll be talking to about 500 people in a theatre. And I thought, okay, and what was I going to talk about? And they said, we'll talk about the future of the clothing industry and the opportunities and threats that you see and the insights that you have coming from where you come from about the way you see global trade playing out. And I thought, yeah, okay, I can do that. So I set to towards the end of that day, and I knocked out a few slides on the matter to shape my own thoughts and discussion, and I began to think about the event and what was happening. And about 5 or 6 o'clock in the day, I received a phone call, and they said, have you thought about what you're going to talk about tomorrow? I said, yeah. Have you got something written up? I said, well, I've put some slides together. And they said, yeah, have you written it out in a longer form, perhaps for an article or an abstract of the talk, that we can put into the brochure? And I said, the brochure? I was quite shocked by this statement. I said, the brochure? I said, it's tomorrow, isn't it? And they said, yeah, it's tomorrow morning, and we start at 9. But if we can get your article, your summary, by 10 o'clock this evening, we can put it in the brochure. And I was quite shocked by this. And I said, okay, I'll try and do that. But the thing that shocked me was the time frame, how they'd framed time. To them, time wasn't the problem. And I was thinking, how would I ever do this in Europe or even in the United States? How would I actually be able to write something and at 9 or 10 o'clock at night somebody come and pick it up in disk form or on a memory stick from my computer, take it away and pop it into a brochure for the next morning? I was very intrigued. And they said, oh, could we have a photograph as well? So they wanted a headshot of me, and I said, yeah, I'm sure you can take a photograph. I said, and they said, well, I've got somebody who can take a photograph, because it was pre-instant phone days that I'm talking about here. So we didn't have mobile phones where we could just take a quick selfie and fire it off, or we didn't necessarily carry an image of ourselves around except in our passports. And I didn't really want that one going forward, because you never look good in a passport, do you? So I thought, okay. And they said, okay, we'll send somebody around who can take a photograph and do that. So they did. So they came round, and about 10 o'clock in the evening, they took the photograph, and they took the chip away with the article on it and my slides for the next day. And I thought no more of it. I just thought, interesting. Be interesting to see if they get that done. Next morning, when I was taken to the venue for where I was giving this talk, I turned up and I did the niceties, shaking hands, saying hello to people, and getting ready to speak. The conference hall was at the big convention centre in Colombo, and it was dressed out like a circular theatre. And there I was, ready to speak on a topic I didn't know I was going to speak on just 12 hours before, with a brochure with my article in, printed overnight from what I had typed into my computer the previous afternoon and evening. And then I saw the posters with my head and shoulders on it, the shot from the evening before. I saw the title of my talk that I'd put together the previous day. I looked and saw some quotes that were pushed out, and then I saw a pack, a delicate pack, with the conference brochure, because it was a full-day conference, this, and I was doing the keynote speech right at the start of the day. And there it was, the brochure, all nicely produced, full colour, inside, prime of place, me. The article I'd written the day before, published inside the first couple of pages, summarising the way forward for the industry in Sri Lanka and how the global industry was going to shape up, all published in that article with a timetable for the day and various other things and some advertising in the brochure. And this was about a 16-page brochure, I seem to recall. And it struck me, this would never have happened back home. They wouldn't have been able to do this overnight, print something of high quality and have it on people's desks and in their bags, delegate bag, for the day of the conference. So they'd waited for me to arrive before doing it. So it wasn't a long planning process. They didn't actually tell me before I came out that I'd be doing this. It was just something that they decided in a day or two before I arrived that they were going to do it. They had people lined up. And when I walked into the hall, there were 500 people sitting round. They included government ministers, heads of different industry groups and private firms in Sri Lanka, all sat in the room. And I stood up after the introduction and I gave my presentation. And the discussion went on for about an hour and a half. There was an open discussion, questions and answers, and it was a really good event. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And of course I was stimulated by the fact that I'd put this together very quickly. And so when I talk about time, there's short time and there's long time. And I'd always been used to working in long time, planning things weeks ahead, having the time to think about it endlessly, and pulling together a talk if it was a talk, or a written piece if it was a written piece, over a number of weeks. But here, this had happened within 12 hours of landing in Sri Lanka. So, there's time and there's polychronic time. And it taught me a lot of lessons, that things can be done with a will and a way, and they can be done fast. I suppose what I began to recognise is that it was a cultural time. Time, you learn about time in your own place of work and your own lived experience. And when those conventions fall away and somebody says, well, time here is different. They didn't actually say that, I know, but they actually believed that time was not the constraint that I believed at that time it was. They simply took that assumption away, got on with the task, and completed it in very short time. And that just wouldn't have happened in my world at that time. It would have taken much longer to pull it together. But it taught me lessons about how things can be done differently. And I think the most important thing we can take away from this particular lesson, if indeed a lesson it is that you can think differently without the constraint of time, or for that matter, any other constraint that you think is fixed, because it might not be quite as fixed as you think. And if a constraint isn't as fixed as you think, and you can remove it, you can achieve things differently, and things can be done faster, more efficiently. And I suppose that lesson I learned in an earlier time served me well in later times when I wanted to get things done. I always thought of the example in Sri Lanka.
Right to the point.
If you like the podcast, don't forget to subscribe, and you'll be first to know when a new episode drops.